right, we are going to talk about your destiny has a scarecrow in this session, and we're going to get into judgments and inner vows and what that has to do with scarecrows and freedom and all kinds of things. But I want to start by sharing a story. So this was when Jeff and I were dating, so it was about 10 years ago. And I'm from Iowa, he's from here, and so I was going to take him home for the first time and meet the family and the extended family and show him all of the amazingly fun things to do in Iowa, which there are hardly any. So you have to make up things to do for fun. And so I said, well, let's go down to this place. We have the classic Midwest downtown with the 2-story buildings right by the Mississippi River. And let's go down to Weird Harold's, a place that's been there since I was a kid. And you can go up on the second floor and we can do pottery. And my nieces were little at the time. Let's take them and go do some pottery. So we got up there and there's a little kids having a birthday party. And I had this light bulb moment and I said, why don't you get a plate, because you could pick any kind of pottery. You get a plate and I'll get a plate. And you sit across from me and let's just put some books up. And I will paint your face and you paint my face. You already know this isn't going to go well. And I said, we won't look at them until they come out of the kiln, and then we just, get to see. And I kind of already knew we'd probably end up getting married, and this would be a little keepsake that we could have. And so we're painting these portraits of one another, but I start seeing looks on his face that are like, looking at me and looking down. I'm like, this is not good. And then I see the little birthday party of girls. They figured out what we're doing, and they're wandering over, and they're looking over his shoulder, and they're going. And he got up and went to the bathroom, and they're looking at his, and they looked at mine. I said, who's better? And they said, yours. Yours is your painting is way better. And so we didn't realize that it was going to be a few days before we get the plates back, and we had to go back to Iowa. So my mom said, I'll pick them up for you and then I'll ship them to you. And I said, okay, great, but I don't want to see what they look like. Don't take a picture, nothing. 3 days later, she calls me and she's hysterical on the phone. Like, did somebody die? She's like, oh my goodness, I just went down to Weird Harold's and I picked up your plates, and you are not going to believe this. She's dying laughing. And so I said, I don't want to see it. I want to wait to get them. And she sends them to me. I know you want to see them. So first of all, I want to show you how I painted Jeff. I know. Thank you for going, because I feel like that's pretty good. In fact, I said, I painted you. You look kind of like a Ken doll. So I've seen my future husband. It's like this little Ken doll. And then, let's get a drum roll. All right. Here's how he painted me. Yeah. And I still married him. Or I should say, he still married me. And that's how he sees me. So here's what was so funny. When my mom called me, she was just dying laughing, and my niece was 5 years old at the time. And she said, I showed Miley the 2 plates, and my 5-year-old niece goes, Grandma, who's the creepy one? So I showed this to my friend Nancy, and she had a really good observation. She said, you look like the Scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz. And I said, you're right. I know I have a big nose, but I didn't know it looked like a wooden spoon. Like the Angry Bird eyes. And then I what's going on with the hair? He got hungry, so he was just like, shh, okay, I'm out of here. So this session, I want to, just please take that off of there. So this session, I want to talk about distorted images that we get, not only of ourselves, but through other people. And part of what distorts our image of ourselves, our people, places, God, all of those things, is we make judgments that aren't true. They're unrighteous judgments. And so I want to really focus on judgments today. But I want to refer back to one of the prep classes, the one called Hug the Cactus, where we talked about embracing suffering. And I talked about this critical intersection that we all come to many times in life, and it's suffering. And it's how we navigate suffering that really turns us into who God created us to be. It's how God develops our character and removes the impurities. And so we get at these critical junctures where we suffer deeply. The death of a loved one, or we go through a relational breakup or some sort of pain. And I mean, it's real. The pain is real, and the heartache is real. And so we stand at the edge of this, and God's desire, of course, is that we walk the walk of faith. When life doesn't make sense and we're going through those dark nights of the soul, that we just hang on to his hand and we walk it out, and we let him kind of purge us and remove the impurities. What Jeff said to me, I forgot my little transition line there. He told me with the plate, I said, seriously? Like, that's what you see when you look at me? He told me, well, you know, it got ruined in the kiln. That was what he told me. So that's what got me like, that could preach a whole message. It got ruined in the kiln, in the fire. But that is kind of what happens, isn't it? We go through the fire, and it changes us if we don't navigate it well. If we navigate it well, what happens is actually our spiritual eyes get open. I talk about the lens that's over our heart. Spiritually, we start to see other people the way that God sees them. When we start removing our impurities, we start seeing God for who he really is, that he's a God of love and that he's good. And we start seeing ourselves the way that he created us. When we navigate suffering well, we navigate the fire well. It just opens up our spiritual eyes. But if we go back here to when we suffer and we don't suffer well, and we start walking away from God, walking the path of unbelief and letting go of the promises of God and disconnecting from people that are close to God, letting that bitterness and resentment and all that creep in that we talked about last night. What happens is our spiritual lens gets super, super clouded, and we become a distorted version of ourselves, and we see other people not as they really are. We don't see them through God's eyes, through love and through compassion, and we get a distorted image of God. And whenever we have a distorted image of God, it changes the image of ourself. And so the key really is how we navigate suffering. But I want to tie this in to judgments, because Jesus tied our spiritual vision into judgments in Matthew chapter 7. This is the famous verse about the speck and the plank. Jesus said, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." So Jesus is telling us when we make unrighteous judgments, he's not talking naturally. It's not like we have a 2x4 coming out of our eye, but Jesus is telling us when we make incorrect judgments about people, places, God, ourselves, when we make incorrect judgments, it's like there's a plank over our spiritual vision, and we're not seeing properly. Now notice that Jesus didn't say that we shouldn't help remove specks out of other people's eyes. That's actually the goal, but we have to remove the plank that's in our own eye. We got to get rid of all the judgments that we've made about other people and about ourselves. We got to remove that so that we can help take specks out of other people's eyes. You know what kind of vision it takes to remove a speck out of somebody's eye? You have to have really good vision, the little tweezers, and you have to have great vision. And you can't do it if you have false judgments that are in your heart. So I want to talk about judgments for a little bit. There's all sorts that are listed in your handout there. I'm not going to go over all of them, but I want to make a couple points about judgments. First of all, it's okay to make a judgment. Sometimes we hear that word and we think it only has a negative connotation. But the Bible actually says in John 7:24, "Stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly." So there are righteous judgments. We are supposed to make judgments, and here's how it works. We evaluate people's behavior. That's definitions listed in there. Make an assessment based on a firsthand experience or observation. So I evaluate your behavior. I evaluate your words. You're doing the same thing with me. And if we're in close relationship with one another, let's say that we work together, and I share parts of my life that are kind of intimate and they're vulnerable, and I open up to you and I see that other people do the same thing with you, and I notice over time that you can keep it confidential and you're trustworthy. Well, I can make a judgment that you're a safe person, and it's safe for me to share with you, and you're going to keep it in confidence. But if you do the opposite, and I share with you, and I find out you're telling other people, or you're telling me stuff that people have told you in confidence, I should make the judgment that I need to have different boundaries with you, that you're not safe to share with. That's a correct judgment. A judgment is forming an opinion or conclusion about someone or something based on evaluations. Now, evaluations are firsthand. So it's not hearsay. I've experienced, I've seen this, and I'm making a judgment. But it's not okay to make unrighteous judgments. And that's really what we want to focus on in this session. So the first type is a harmful judgment. And this is attaching an evaluation to someone's identity. So if we go back to the example that I just shared, if I've experienced you gossiping or sharing things that I told you in confidence with other people, I've observed that behavior, but what I can't do is take what you did and attach it to who you are. So I can't say, you're a gossiper, you're a slander, and start saying those things about you, because I'm stamping that on your very identity. And we can do this about all sorts of things. Somebody maybe has committed adultery 7 years ago, and we know about it. And they've confessed, and they've gone through a healing process, but we still label them with what they did. That's a harmful judgment, to attach what people do to who they are. The next one is a hard-hearted judgment. This one is claiming to know the motives or condition of somebody's heart. And it is impossible for us to know what's going on inside someone else's heart. I remember being a teenager, and the adults in my life were navigating this difficult situation with somebody that was an authority figure, and from what I was piecing together, he just had a problem lying. Like, he would just lie to get out of things, deceitful. And so I remember listening to them kind of navigating through that process, and I remember one of the people involved saying, I'll always know if he gets to heaven or not based on if he apologizes to me. And I just remember the record scratching, like, I was just a kid, but I was like, that doesn't sound right. There was no possible way for us to know someone's eternal destination or what's going on inside somebody's heart. 1 Corinthians 4:5 says, therefore judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. So it's God's place to judge the heart. Here's the third one. I think this one we're all guilty of at some point. This is a transfer judgment. Forming a premeditated opinion or conclusion about someone or something based on an unrelated experience. And we can do this about so many things. So we have an experience with someone, let's say, of a certain race, and they behave a certain way that's unfavorable, and so we make the judgment, I can't trust that person. I like to say it's like a rubber stamp. Like, we make the judgment, I can't trust that person. And the judgment's actually correct, because we've evaluated, we've observed as firsthand, I can't trust that person. But now anyone that we come in contact that's in that same race, if we take that judgment and we put it on them, we're transferring that judgment to them. Well, I can't trust you because of the color of your skin. I can't trust you, and I can't trust you. And now what we've done is we've put a line, and those people don't have access to us because we've judged them. So we can do it with races, we can do it with gender. I know a lot of people that have gone through things in their childhood. They have either mother wounds or father wounds, and this typically happens a lot with father wounds. And so they make a judgment that men can't be trusted. And then they get into their adult life, and that's the judgment that's on their heart. The person that harmed them, that was a true judgment. That man couldn't be trusted. But now everyone that they come in contact with that's a male, it's that they've made that judgment on them. Well, guess what happens with their relationships? It eventually gets sabotaged because that judgment is residing in their heart. So we can do it with gender, we can do it with races, we can do it with classes of people. Let's say we help somebody that's really needy, and we give and we give and we give of ourselves, and then we find out that they've actually been deceiving us the whole time and have drained us. Well, we make a judgment that that's not good stewardship, and we've made a correct judgment because they've deceived us. Well, then what happens when somebody else in need comes into our life? Those poor people are just lazy. We transfer a judgment that we made about one person onto everybody that resembles them. And the opposite can be the same too. Rich people are superficial. We can do it about places. All mega churches want is your money. You can't trust TV pastors. See what I'm saying? We just put a stamp on a broad stroke of people, and it's not our place to do that, especially if we haven't evaluated firsthand what's going on in their lives. And then the fourth one is self-judgment. This is forming an unrighteous opinion or conclusion about oneself. We haven't used this phrase in the retreat so far, but we've been hearing testimonies about it. Last night, Amber talked about the way that she would judge herself. Sherry talked about it in her testimony today, the way that she'd put limits on herself with self-judgments. And sadly, it often happens because of repeating things that authority figures in our life have said. So we're repeating those things and we're labeling ourselves. And typically it sounds a little bit, it ends up sounding a little bit like this. I can't, you fill in the blank, because fill in the blank. And it's based on experiences we've had in the past. So I can't ever get married because I didn't have a healthy example of it when I was a kid. I remember someone telling me that in a counseling situation. And that was a judgment that she made about herself, and her life was reflecting that. Well, you're not the product of your past. You can't get new tools and heal and grow. But it was a judgment that she made about herself. I'm never going to be able to get married. Or I can't get married because I've been told I'm not marriage material. Or here's one for me. I can't be in a leadership position or be up front speaking because I'm a woman. And boy, I let that be a limit in my life for a long time. And not really stepping into what God was calling me to because I had labeled that on myself. All right, so you can do that in a ton of different ways, but I can't fill in the blank because, and we put a limit on ourselves. And the last thing, and this is not a judgment, but it's associated, especially with self-judgments, is inner vows. And this is a promise that I make to myself apart from God. When we put judgments on people, or put judgments on ourselves, what typically happens is it results in us making this promise to myself. So let's say that I grow up in a home where I'm abused and the discipline is super harsh. I can end up making a vow that sounds a little something like this. Well, when I have kids, I'm never going to touch them. And we make this vow, but we actually go way to the other side of the ditch and we don't discipline our children at all. So now we're the exact opposite of what happened to us, but we aren't in that safe space where we actually provide discipline. Or we grow up really poor, and then we make I am never going to be, or we make a vow to ourselves, I'm going to be the richest person that I know. Well, is that what God said about you, or is that something you're saying based on the wound that you went to? And then their whole life is driven by making money because they've made a promise to themselves. I've talked to pastors before, 2 different times, that went through church hurt, and out loud they said, I'm never working for a church again. Well, if that's what God says, that's okay to agree with that, but if you're saying it out of pain, you've just put a limit on what God may be asking you to do. And it really is like a spiritual wall when you make these judgments and vows that you can't get past because you're not in agreement with God. You're in agreement with yourself, or you're in agreement with the enemy. So I want to walk through, I've got these signs up here. I'm going to tell you 4 really short testimonies, and I'll end with part of mine, and then we'll move into the reset moment. But I titled this message, Your Destiny Has a Scarecrow, because I was actually praying about a month ago, and God just kind of showing me this word picture. And I was like, Lord, where does this fit? Where does this fit? And he said, it fits in judgments and inner vows. And when I was praying, I was thinking about a scarecrow, and scarecrows, when it's not the decoration kind, but the actual scarecrow. Scarecrows are planted in gardens where there's fruit or there's seed that's in the ground. And so a gardener puts a scarecrow there. It's a broomstick, wooden arms, it's totally fake, eyes that can't see, ears that can't hear. And the scarecrow hovers over where there's a harvest, and it scares the crows away. Now, if a crow is smart, think about this. If a crow is smart, it should just fly through the neighborhood and just look for scarecrows. Because if it finds a scarecrow, it's going to find the treasure that's in the ground. And as I was praying, the Lord was showing me that we have scarecrows in our memories. It's people that we've made judgments about because of our pain. It's places that have wounded us. It's ourself, judgments we've made about ourselves, and then judgments that we've made about God. And we're terrified of these scarecrows. That's why a lot of people don't like to go through a process like this, because oh, you're going to make me think about those hard things. Yeah, you know why? Because there's a treasure in the ground that's planted right underneath that memory that you have. It's typically the place where God wants to bless you. Eric Hoffer says, you can discover what your enemy fears most by observing the means he uses to frighten you. Isn't there truth in that? So I got my scarecrow here. So people, I have a young girl, Khadija, I've been mentoring for several years. She was here last night. She gave me permission to share her story. But her scarecrow was when she was young, her mom left when she was about 2. Her mom's been a drug addict her whole life. She's had no relationship with her. So there was a rejection, mother wound. And then her father was just really neglectful. And neglectful to the point where he just didn't protect her the way that a good father should. And so she was molested when she was very young by other men that were in her life, not her dad. And so her judgment, of course, was that men aren't safe. And that was just stamped on everyone that was a man. And as she became a young adult, what she began doing was turning to same-sex relationships because she had put this stamp that men aren't safe. And she just had this need for nurturing and need for mom. And I remember sitting with her one day. She actually called me and she's like, I'm just doing really bad. Can you come over to the college campus there and meet with me? And she was curled up in a ball in a chair. And she was saying, everybody should have a mom. I never had a mom. And as we were talking through it, I tried to paint a picture for her of what life could be. And I said, well, you can have the things that you didn't have. We're going to go through this process. You're going to heal, and you can get married someday. You can have a family. And she said, I can't have a family because I never saw it modeled to me. And so we started attacking that lie because this was hanging out in her memory. And it was just planted in an area where I know that God wanted to bless her with a happy marriage and a happy family, but she had this scarecrow hanging out in her memory, and she was terrified to go anywhere near that, all right? And so you can kind of apply that to your life, whatever the judgment that you've made. And then there's places, and I could give 100 different examples, but this one is, I see this a lot right now, and it's with church. We go through a church hurt, so then we go to try a new church, and we can go in, sit down, listen to a message, watch the worship, and just, that did nothing for me. That message did nothing for me. I don't feel God's presence. Looking at these people, you probably can't trust them. There's probably something shady going on behind the scenes. What's happening? There's a scarecrow. It's the memory of what we went through in the past. Somebody else can come in and sit right next to me that hasn't been through the things that I've been through. Like, oh, that was the best message. These people are so nice. I love the worship. You know why? Because they don't have a scarecrow hanging out in their memory. The person that's went through something difficult has just made a judgment about church. And we can do that about workplaces. We can do it about all sorts of, we can do it about countries. But we can make judgments about places, and we just want to stay away from those places. But that church might be the very place where there's treasure in the ground. There might be relationships there. There might be ministry opportunities there where God wants to bless us, but the scarecrow's keeping us away. And then we can do it about ourselves. My sister-in-law, Kim, this was her big one. She was in a car accident when she was 4 years old, and the car flipped over. She got this chemical burn all down the left side of her body, her stomach, up into her head. Had to have multiple surgeries over the years. When she was in junior high school, the doctor said, if we don't put expanders in her stomach and stretch her stomach from the scarring, she's not going to be able to have kids, and we need to do it now while she's growing. So they put these expanders in her stomach. She's in junior high, going to school, and she looks pregnant. So she's getting bullied, and she's getting teased. And she missed a lot of school because of surgery, so she got behind. And so she always felt stupid, and she hated the scar on her face. There's a scar on the back of her head where her hair would part, and a lot of scarring on her leg. And so she would literally stand in front of a mirror, and she would look at herself in a mirror, and she would make judgments about herself. You are so ugly. You are so stupid. Nobody's ever going to love you. And her core lie was just this unworthiness of love. So her inner vow was, I'm not going to let anyone get close to me. It was just a promise that she made to herself. And she said literally, like when she was doing that, she could feel like something creeping up her back because she's agreeing with the wrong voice. So that was her story. Now what's amazing about Kim's story, I'm going to put a picture of her up there. She married my brother, and she's got two awesome, I'm kind of biased, but two awesome young adult kids. And they were children's pastors for 20 years. And what they do now is they're health coaches, and she helps people with body image. And she's got this beautiful family. And so her Scarecrow, there was actually treasure in the ground right there. That was the very area where God wanted to bless her, with a happy marriage, with wonderful kids, and helping people with body image. And part of what she does when she helps people with body image is she walks them through this freedom process. And then the last one is God. We can make judgments about God, and this one was mine. I grew up, I listened to the parent wounds session and it just breaks my heart, and I just thank God. I always want to call my parents afterwards, thank you, you were good parents. They're not perfect, but I didn't have to deal with that, and that stuff is so hard and heavy. But for me, it was God. I grew up in a church that just didn't teach grace well. And I was terrified of God. I was terrified of going to hell. They painted an excellent picture of hell, and I was terrified of it. And Sherry kind of touched on this too, but I loved Jesus. He was so attractive. He died for me. I was terrified of God, and I had no clue who the Holy Spirit was. And he's the comforter. And so I had this distorted image of God that he was always mad at me and always kicking me out of the family. Now imagine that in your natural family. You screw up, your dad's you're out of the family. You have to knock on the door. Can I get back in? Yes, you're back in. You screwed up. You're out of the family. Well, that's how it felt for me in my relationship with God. Is that every time I screwed up, I'd be 8 years old, and I could remember that I'd walk past a piece of trash. I'd be walking with my friends in the playground or something. I'd hear this voice you should have picked that up. If you were a good Christian, you should have picked that up. God, I'm sorry. Now I'm going to hell. That's how my mind worked. Now I'm going to hell. God, you gotta, I'd be trying to play at recess. God, forgive me for not picking the trash out. I'd hear the voice say, you didn't mean it, say it again. See, that kind of voice is it's a slave driver. So I'd say it again. No, you didn't mean it, say it again. Literally, this is what I would hear. No, if you really want God to hear you, you need to close your eyes. So I'm trying to play Foursquare, and I'm God, forgive me. I'm trying not to look goofy. I literally 50, 75, 100 times a day, I was begging God for my salvation again for years. And the way that manifests in my life was I was sick all the time because I was riddled with anxiety. Sherry mentioned the attachment styles, but you can apply those to God. And I had a fearful attachment with God. Totally didn't feel secure ever in my relationship with God. And so it was this distorted image of him. And the voice that I would hear, because I had great parents, would say, don't talk to your parents about this. Because if they're going to think you're crazy. Even preparing for this testimony, there's that little voice if you share this, you're going to sound crazy to the people. No, I'm not listening to that voice anymore. But what was my destiny that God has for me? To lead a ministry like this, what's it based on? Hearing God's voice. So if you're going to attack a little girl whose destiny is to help people into freedom and to awaken them to the presence of God and to hear his voice, where would you plant a scarecrow? In her ability to hear God and to have a distorted image of God where he's not a God of love and he's not for you. And so that was my scarecrow planted exactly in the place where God wanted to bless me. And I'm telling you the same thing is true for you here today. That the place where you've put judgments, the place where you've been wounded most, that's the place where there's a treasure in the ground.
Do you feel stuck? Like you're rereading the same chapter of your life over and over again and can't seem to turn to the next page? Maybe it's a bad habit or a thought pattern that you can't seem to kick, or it's a past hurt or shame for something that you've done that you can't seem to let go of. Maybe it's even a belief about yourself that you know in your mind isn't true, but you just can't seem to get it into your heart. Well, if you're ready to experience breakthrough and turn to the next chapter of your life, I would like to invite you to join us at our upcoming Reset Retreat. This is a 2-day weekend designed to help you break free from whatever is holding you back. Through teachings, worship, and interactive experiences, you will have a divine encounter with Jesus Christ, who can set you free to be the person He has called you to be. Go to resetministries.us/retreat for more information and to register.